This is The Writing Game, and I'm Gregory Palachi. No one starts with the themes when they're telling a story, or at least no one has admitted to ever successfully writing a story that starts that way. Themes emerge with time. It's the reason why you edit a story, because it gives you an opportunity to go through, find those themes, and strengthen them through iteration. Throughout the ages, stories with certain basic themes have recurred over and over in widely disparate cultures, emerging like the goddess Venus from the sea of our unconscious. Joan D. Vinge. Before we can address themes, we have to know what they are and how they work. In the simplest sense, and the one most people should be aware of from language or literature classes, a theme is a recurring idea. Themes occur in literature in two ways: the repetition of a phrase or the reoccurrence of an image. In either case, the idea being repeated does not have to be copied exactly, but it can be. In literature, it's common to have themes examined from a number of perspectives, and the same holds true for other mediums. The exception there may be music, where a theme is oftentimes a recognizable melody that is repeated. Star Wars and its themes for Darth Vader and other characters are prime examples. They're some of the most memorable examples even. Video games being an amalgam of various mediums, cinema, literature, and music, undoubtedly can and should make use of all possible methods of introducing themes. But at this point, you may still be wondering what a theme in a video game looks like given their penchant for shooting or blowing stuff up. How can anyone say anything with that? Well, I won't immediately look at a game with shooting, but rather one that's quite overt in its themes. The Witcher 3. There are two major themes running throughout the game. There are others that we find in side quests, but it's these two that reoccur throughout the main story. Those themes are fatherhood and men versus women. Fatherhood is repeated thrice throughout the main story in various forms. Given the entire time Geralt is looking for his adopted daughter Ciri, it's hard not to say otherwise. But in his travels looking for Ciri, he encounters the Bloody Baron. The Baron is an absent, abusive father who is confronted by his misdeeds at the loss of his family and the rejection of his daughter. Fatherhood, in this case, is quite literally what he relates to Geralt over, not violence or war or monsters. Fatherhood continues when Geralt goes to Skellige and meets with Krak on Crate, and his children, Hjalmar, Ceres, Ragnar, and Loki. Whereas the Bloody Baron was about the pain caused through fatherhood and the loss one can experience, Krak's questline is about what one can pass on to children. It's about inheritance. Every instance where Geralt encounters another father is one where the theme is reiterated and explored. All the dimensions of what it means to be a father are placed in the game, from the responsibility, love, exasperation, hope, and future that such an experience holds. In game design, especially when it comes to puzzle, enemy, or level design, it's common to iterate, to repeat an idea and see how it can be changed or improved. Themes are really no different. That's why we see Geralt encounter other fathers who are having their own issues with their own children. None of those problems is exactly the same, but they are of a theme. The story of Geralt and his search for Ciri need never have had the Bloody Baron or Krak on Crate be fathers. They could equally have related to Geralt as men, warriors, drinkers, gamblers, or other aspects inherent to the world of The Witcher 3. But those other aspects would not have tied into the story as well. nor would they necessarily have provided as complex depictions of those characters as fatherhood does. And fatherhood is a more common theme in games these days, not just because game developers are aging and looking for new experiences that more closely relate to their lives, though that's certainly part of it, but because it's an easy way to make protagonists emotionally vulnerable and mechanically impotent when they're superpowered ubermensch, as they so often are in video games. Just look at the most recent God of War, or The Last of Us before that, or even The Walking Dead. All three games deal with fatherhood in some sort, for better or worse. The Witcher 3 doesn't just stick to examining fatherhood. It examines gender and how the various genders relate to one another. It does this through Geralt's interactions with Ciri, Yennefer, Triss, Kira, and, of course, the crones of Crookback Bog. The women in their stories and encounters with people other than Geralt also build upon this theme, and each in their own particular way. Ciri obviously takes the position of daughter or child, though clearly an adult and not a child physically or mentally, she may need Geralt's help regardless. For the greater part of the game, the player is tasked with ascertaining Ciri's whereabouts and condition. Yennefer and Triss share the position of lover or friend, depending on how you play out the potential romances. In each instance, it's Geralt who needs their help, and only later, through interacting with them and building on the player character's relationship, do they need Geralt. While Kira sits firmly in the middle of the spectrum of women in relation to Geralt, as she is both a friend and lover, but someone who also needs his help. That leaves us with the Crones of Crookback Bog, a trio of creatures that serve no purpose but their own, and whom both Ciri and Geralt's encounters with are nothing but antagonistic, if not always overtly so. Every one of these women, crones included, is treated as Geralt's equal. Yes, he may have feelings for them, or feel protective, or disgusted, or even disagree with their choices, but that does not mean he undermines them or otherwise puts them down. He recognizes in each that they have their strengths, weaknesses, and areas of expertise where he does not. This is readily contrasted by most other men in the game. Witch hunters, bandits, soldiers, druids, warriors, and most other NPCs that attack anyone who can't be classified as a sentient being. The only males who don't seem to have it out actively for women happen to be a few friends of Geralt. But even the Wild Hunt, the spectral force, which presents as male or masculine and is the titular antagonist of the game, is after a woman, namely Ciri. They are another iteration of the male gender, at least in my armchair analysis, as there's nothing explicit about the Wild Hunt having any gender beyond the body shape given to the characters. Women take a big role in the life of Geralt, and that's not to say we don't see him examining the role of men in men-to-men relationships or third or non-gendered persons. The latter really only happens once with the elf Elihal, and even then it's not explored in any great detail. So I can't say definitively what, if any, gender they prefer to go by. I think by now you may get the point, or at least see that The Witcher has a lot going on with it and its story. The writing and narrative design are good because they iterate on an idea and not just a mechanic. And games, unlike other mediums, are composed of so much more, so many more ways that themes can be established and emphasized. It's not the writing alone, but color palettes, art styles, musical scores, sound design, mechanics and systems integration, and just about every other aspect of a game that can strengthen and support a theme, even the menus. Just take a look at Spec Ops The Line and what they do. Themes don't occur without effort. Sure, the first and basis versions of them may, but that's the case for any medium. The first draft always has something worthwhile in it. It's why we rewrite and edit. Editing is iteration. To do so successfully, or well, since the two are not always the same, requires taking a step back, not just from the script, but the game. In the process of writing or designing, it can be and is difficult to know what you have. Things automatically make sense in your head because you know what you mean, what your intentions are. It takes no effort to describe to yourself what those things are. It's different when you're communicating with another person. So, as with all forms of communication, in writing, we have to seek clarity and test to make sure we're achieving that. And games really are no different in that regard. By and large, they've gotten really good at testing most aspects of them to see if they're working. It's why Destiny 2's gun combat can feel so fun and good. A weird concept when you stop to think that I'm actively saying it feels good to shoot someone in video games. But games are not so good at testing the story. We don't have screenings like films do to see if it works for an audience. Of course, even with film, they're not always changing things to make movies comprehensible or logical. When games are being tested, beta tested, more often than not, it's about the systems rather than the stories. The fact is, there's no firm way to go about finding the themes of your game beyond self-examination and critical analysis at every stage. Every game is created in a different manner. By that I mean some games are created with a mechanic in mind, others want to evoke a feeling, and still others have story to tell, or at least an IP to use. Whatever the case, it takes iteration and editing of the story to bring out the themes and hone them to something that speaks to the players. That takes time, something too often not given to the story. There are some themes that exist without the need to do much work. Oppression and fighting are going to be inherent to any work dealing with Nazis or fascism. Just look at Wolfenstein. You're quite literally trying to fight oppression. But Machine Games went one further in the two latest versions, the New Order and the New Colossus. They didn't merely demonstrate the Nazis as being a force a soldier contends with, but one society does. As fun as it can be to punch Nazis, the games show you a world under the thumb of the Nazi regime, and how everyone is affected for the worse by it. They made games where it's not just Allied soldiers who have to fight Nazis, but women, children, Africans, African Americans, Jews, Christians, and even former Nazis, as is the case of Klaus Kreutz, who turned on them when his son was killed by the Nazis for a birth defect. And this is really further illustrated in the New Colossus when American Ku Klux Klan members who are Nazi supporters in the game welcome the Nazi regime to the US, but are being forced to convert to speaking German. Even in their own ostensible homeland, white supremacists are being oppressed. Machine Games have done brilliantly at showing across two games how fascism and oppression hit at home. They have written and emphasized a theme and message in such a way that the game reinforces it, not just through the story, but level design, sound design, and world building. Mechanics is another issue, but it wouldn't be a Wolfenstein game if you weren't a Jewish superpowered Ubermensch, which itself is clearly a knock at the idea of the Ubermensch for being a strictly Aryan concept or ability. Your game is going to have a message, and that message can be explicit or implied, or it can sit somewhere on the spectrum between the two. Where it is and how well it does, of course, will be determined by your writing. Themes will help convey that message. They will help a player understand what you as a writer or creator are trying to say if you're not just bludgeoning them with a hammer like Nazis are bad, which they are. Really feel like I shouldn't have to iterate that, but apparently I do these days. And themes will also help the feeling you're hoping to impart, but they will only do so if you know what you're trying to say. But more on messaging in games in a future episode. For now, I figure I'll just end this with a mention of some of the themes in Firewatch and Gone Home, because I didn't talk about those games in the last episode. So, the themes are isolation, connection, and the self. It's the same themes for both of them. And no, I won't waste your time by arguing those points. You can always hit me up on Twitter if you want to know more. Unlike The Witcher 3 or Wolfenstein, both Firewatch's and Gone Home's mechanics help to emphasize their themes. Now, it's not always possible based on the story of the game and its genre. So, if you want to tie a story's themes to other aspects of the game beyond just the narrative, it's going to require two things. One, the story is written at the beginning to allow time for editing and iteration. Two, those themes are communicated to the rest of your team, so they are given the chance to explore them and in turn impact the narrative as well. Thanks for taking part in this episode of The Writing Game. I'm Gregory Placi. Everything I do can be found at onegamedad.com, and I can be reached there or on Twitter at onegamedad if you want to talk writing, games, this show, or even working together. The Writing Game is hosted by my company, the Third Culture Kids, which can be found at thirdculturekids.net. Please be sure to like and subscribe or rate and review this show on whatever platform you find it. I'll see you on the next episode.